Thanks a lot for joining the RadFab today, Jean. I appreciate you coming on the program to talk about some provincial music action.
Well, it's my pleasure, Jay. It's nice to be here.
Cool. And I'll just let the listeners know that I do also work with Jean as with Musique NB, or part of the MID team. So I just want to put that out there, that there may be some conflict of interest here. But yeah, I thought it might be interesting to, well, I'd like to use this interview to kind of explain to folks the investment process in that the province provides to artists. But before we get into that, I thought it'd be cool to talk about where it started, or as far as I'm aware, where it started from, which was the NB Sound Initiative.
Yeah, so the NB Sound Initiative came after, it's kind of a funny story, when the ECMAs first came to New Brunswick. That had been like, I think, 1997.
Okay.
And it was, the awards show was at the Coliseum, and the story goes that the premier of the time, who was Frank McKenna, he was sitting there, and to his right at the time, the president of ECMA, Marc Chouinard, who was the general manager of the Capitol Theatre here. Okay. And to his right, someone who was working within the cultural department, Ministry of Culture at the time, probably sports and a bunch of other things. And they were looking at the show, and there were no nominees from New Brunswick. There were there were a couple of performances, because it had to, we're in New Brunswick, and there was an award given to like a lifetime achievement thing, but no artists from New Brunswick were nominated. And so Frank turns to Mark and said, "Why are there no New Brunswickers on that stage?" And he says, "Well, because there's no investment. There's no program to help artists record albums and tour and work on marketing and such." So not long after that, weeks after that, supposedly, there was a draft of the first funding program, which was called the NB Sound Initiative, that came to being. And I forget how much that fund was, and I have that somewhere in some archives, but it was a pretty significant fund for the first time. And so that's where the first iteration of that fund was created. And at the time, and you can imagine this would have been like in the early 2000s, where album sales were still a thing. People were still buying records, and people were still creating CDs that were, printing CDs and distribution. And so putting New Brunswick artists on the map through sound recording was the focus of that fund. So it was, and even at the time, you would apply to funding, and it wasn't the artist getting the money; it was the studio getting the money. Oh, really? Okay. It was and there were a lot more studios at the time. There were, anyway, it was a different industry. But so that was the first version of the funding that the province put together. Okay. It was managed by the province right up into 2017. Okay. I think it's around 2013, or not, maybe around 2010, 2008, they changed the name to the Music Industry Development Program, the MID program. Okay. Yeah. And then for there, the province was still managing it right up into 2017. We had lobbied hard with government for, I'd say, 3-4 years to transfer the management of the program over to Musique NB. We just provided a case saying, "Hey, look, we know the industry, we understand the needs, and we're close to the artists and such. So, give it to us and give us an admin to do it, and we're going to hire someone. It'll be awesome." So in 2017, we did that. We hired our first MID manager, and that has been, since then, we've been working on making changes to the program to better suit the needs of the industry. But also, we were able, about a year, not even a year, less than a year ago, hire someone else on, who I'm talking to right now. And that's been a really, a great, creating more capacity within the staff to be able to manage the program. So here we are. Yeah, that's very cool. I just want to circle back just for a second, because you mentioned that in '97, that was the first ECMAs in New Brunswick. It was in Moncton. So most artists nowadays would know, or would be aware probably, that the ECMAs jump around from province to province. So back then that wasn't the case? Nope. Back then it was pretty much Halifax all the way. And then at one point they wanted to, and I can't speak to the reasons or how that happened, but they just saw that, hey, if we want to be an Atlantic, a pan-Atlantic event and organization, we have to start moving this event around. And so I think Moncton may have been the first traveling ECMA, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Okay,
very cool. And then in 2017, it splices off from the government and goes under Musique NB's wing. What's the history of Musique NB? Is there, because if Musique NB must have started before that, if Musique NB was pitching the government to take over MID.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So when I came to work with Musique NB in 2008. I had been on the board for a couple of years before that, and I had been on many MID juries before that, because Musique NB was not managing the program prior to 2017, but they were very involved in the jurying process and probably some other parts of it. But they were like, I still find, well, not so long ago, we had boxes and boxes of cassettes where people would be sending their demos for the MID program juries.
Okay.
They were still using cassettes. So from Musique NB started and officially was incorporated in 1998.
Okay.
The first staff member was hired, if I'm not mistaken, in 2000 or 2001. So very early on, Musique NB was involved with the government in prioritizing what types of projects would be funded. I'm assuming maybe making some high-level recommendations on the guidelines and the amounts that should be given and such. And at one point, actually, and not so long before we took over, part of the MIT for, like, I'd say 5-6 years, you could get funding over 2 years. So you'd apply for a record. Again, it was all based on albums. You'd apply to record an album. You'd get $20,000 for that, which is a big amount.
Large sum.
So 20,000, and then you'd also be locked in for another 20,000 the year after for marketing of that album, which makes sense when you think of it. But anyone who's produced an album also knows that things don't always go like you think they're going to go.
Yep.
So even if you set out a timeline, things can happen. Life happens. Whatever, things don't. And so there was, and we kind of were dealing with a little bit of the aftermath of that when we took over the program, because there were some albums that had not finished their production, but they had received some of them anyway. So it's always a challenge. The way it's really important in the way that you decide how the clients are going to be receiving the money, and then what's the next step, so that you're keeping track of it, but you're also not spreading it out over 2 or 3 or 4 years. So anyway, that was the first. Like I was saying before, the MID funding was based. Everything was based on recording and marketing of albums. And at one point, we saw that, yes, these are certainly important parts of our industry, but there are artists that are doing things differently. They're touring more. They're producing a single or many singles over a whole a year, or marketing themselves on social media through content and short videos. So the way we would the guidelines had to change. We had to make that applicants could be applying to different types of projects. We'd have to be a bit more flexible on what we funded. And every year we go through a process of looking at the guidelines and saying, okay, what should we be tweaking here? But at the time, way back when, and Musique NB was involved, but not involved in the management as such. It was still done with the province. And another issue at the time was that there was one deadline at the beginning of the year. You would apply. There was a rolling deadline, and a lot of the time the funding was already gone by by August. By August, all the funding had been promised and depleted. So anyone who had an opportunity, like say a showcase or whatever, let's say in January, well, tough luck, because there's no money left. So that was another issue we really identified for fairly early on. It's like, okay, how can we stretch this funding out, up? how can we stretch it to make sure that if there are any opportunities that arise for artists later in the year, because we follow the government's fiscal year starts on April 1st and finishes on March 31st. So we follow that fiscal year as well.
Okay. Yeah, and any artists or musicians listening would know, like, there's opportunities that arise where all of a sudden, like, you get offered a gig 2 weeks from now or 1 month from now, or maybe like you get a showcase in Toronto, but you're in Fredericton.
Exactly, and now with costs as they are, it's even more expensive to go on the road. So that's where it's so important that when those opportunities do arise, that artists can have a place to turn, provincially and federally. It's important because it's good. And we'll get into the nuts and bolts of what the MID program offers, but most of our programming, most of the funding or the investment that we do provide is 50% of the budget. So a lot of the time, like, you'll be applying for a sound recording or touring. There were some costs that we do cover 100%, like per diems and some artist fees. But the hotels, accommodations, and services, and travel, like renting a car, we cover that at 50%. So it helps, but you still need to find that other 50%.
It's really helpful now, and the way the deadlines, because you mentioned before it was like a deadline, and then it might run out of money. But with the changes in the deadlines in today's program, like, bands that are going out on the road anyway are going out on the road anyway. So they're going to be spending that money for hotels or gasoline or whatever. So now that there's rolling deadlines and the opportunity to apply in those different fashions, it provides those bands access to kind of like a way to recoup a cost that they're already going to spend anyway, because they're already investing in themselves. So it's nice to know that, in my opinion, it's nice to know that that's kind of sitting in the background for people to access if they're going to be on the road anyway.
Yeah, and that's one of the changes we made recently, because to give kind of a perspective to the listeners, we've been sitting on some news for a little while, but the government wanted to make sure they had time to write up a press release and all that good stuff. So finally, we were able to publish the increase that the MID program has received this year, which is a very significant increase. We went from a total of $370,000, and now we're up to $750,000. That includes admin fees and such, but most of that, the vast majority of that is going towards projects. And so, with that announcement, we also on our website, on our webpage, musicnb.org, we also have a lot of details there on some of the changes we made. Because they are significant, and one of the changes was to the deadlines and the time frame you have to apply. So for live touring and showcasing, or even professional development and business travels, let's say you want to go to a significant industry event, or you want to go to a conference, or that's something we would support. And so now with a rolling deadline, this means that you can apply at any time, and you can even apply for costs that have been incurred as of April 1st. So today, we're recording this in July. Well, hey, I played a couple of shows in May. I can apply right now, for those 3-4 shows, because it's a minimum of 3 shows, if I'm not mistaken. I can apply to the live performance component and help with the costs of a tour that would happen maybe a month ago, or that's going to happen in 2 or 3 weeks or a month from now. So it just gives that flexibility of, you do have to show some proof of payment, some receipts, and some that stuff, like almost like doing your taxes. But that's part of the deal, it's free money. So it's like, show us the stuff you did and how you did it, and how you paid for it, and then we can support you, invest in your project.
And it's worth pointing out for that exact situation is that really once you do it the first time, you learn, like, okay, what do we need for proof of payments? What do we need for invoices? What do we need for how do the files and paperwork need to be organized? Once you do it the first time, it kind of you just kind of carry forward, the process, and you just kind of tweak it depending which program you're applying for. So it might be intimidating at first, but it's really, and of course we're always here to help, but all that information's online. So anyone who's thinking about it, who's never touched or looked into the programs before, should definitely check it out.
Yeah, and the program is divided up into 6 different components. So you have the artist development component, which is for emerging artists, artists that are just starting out, or even let's say someone's in a band. You're a bass player or a drummer in a band, and you've had certain success, or you've maybe toured a little bit. And then as a solo artist, hey, I wanted to start my own thing. So even if you've been at it for years with another artist, well, you want to do something new. Well, you're an emerging artist. You don't have any track record. You have to build everything. So this is also for those artists, not only the emerging artists that are coming out of nowhere. So there's the emerging development. I'll get it right. The artist development program, and that's that one's at 75%, which is cool.
Yeah,
it's not 50. And the maximum, as we were talking about some of the changes that happened. Well, we went from 1,500 per project to 2,500. So that's a significant increase right there. The next component, I spoke to it, is the live performance component, which is basically touring. You need at least 3 shows that have been confirmed or played. Domestic tours, $6,000. International tours up to $9,000. Then you have marketing. So marketing is really wide ranging. So let's say you want to do a social media campaign. You want to record you want to shoot a promotional video, you want to create a new website, or just get a new bio and photo photo stuff that around marketing your project. That's $5,000. That one has a deadline. Same thing as artist development. Those are deadlines. There's one more deadline coming up in September 1st. Then you have showcase, much like live performance, but this is really in the context of an industry event. So let's say ECMA, we had mentioned, there are a number of industry events and showcases, and to us, a showcase is not just playing for people. It's playing in front of industry. It's playing in front of talent buyers, people that are looking to book you, to program you at the festival, whatever it may be. So there's domestic showcases like ECMA, M for Montreal. There's a whole slew of really cool Canadian showcases, and that's $5,000 per showcase. And then international showcases at $7,500. Business travel, that's like I was saying, you want to travel to an event or get some professional development happening, that's $3,000. And then sound recording, which we have one deadline a year, and it was in June, so that's passed, and that's $5,000. So you see, there's different parts. There's certain parts of the industry that we're hopefully by next year we'll be able to create new components, because these components have been pretty much the same for many years now. But now with the increase, we're really hoping to create some new components, maybe expand some of these. But there'd be room to helping other segments of the industry. Let's say small venues or studios, maybe startups. It could be special projects that are really like one-offs, but like are outside all of the stuff I just mentioned, even for equity deserving groups, looking at how we can support them. So since this funding was confirmed fairly late in the game, this year is kind of a status quo year, just with more money. But the gears are already turning to create new components and starting that process with the intention to have some new components to present in early 2025.
Yeah, kind of like a mini reboot of the program, but making it a little easier to access, or maybe simplifying the application process maybe a little bit.
Well, that too. I think we try to do that every year, regardless of the components. So that there's 2 things. There's the components, though. That's what is the money being used for? What are the investments being? Where are these investments going to? What kind of activity? And who for who? So there's that, and that's where you have objectives. You have hopefully key indicators of when we do receive the reports back, because it's one thing it's like the 2 parts that are really exciting are, okay, what are the projects that are going to get funding? But at the end of the end of the project, when we actually receive the completion reports, that's the other fun part where you can see, okay, well, what came out of this investment? Like, and when you're talking about showcasing or business travel or even some marketing, we always encourage the applicants to provide us as much information as possible on the outcomes, because we do report back to government. That's obviously something important, but it's also just to see is the program working? Like, is it doing what it's supposed to do? And so that helps us assess sometimes some of the changes that we do before the beginning of every fiscal. But yeah, the streamlining of the process, that's ongoing. I mean, you see it every day. It's like, okay, next year we always have an ongoing document that we update all the time. It's like, oh, we noticed this about because we don't want to change the guidelines in mid stride. You know, there's some small little tweaks that we can make because it makes, there was maybe a mistake or that we didn't notice, or so we will make small changes, but more significant changes usually we take note, and then in the new fiscal, that's where we make more broader changes that are, like, let's say, for the maximum amounts or eligible expenses and stuff like that.
Yeah, and any listeners who's curious too, I would encourage you to go onto the website, even if you don't think you're ready to apply or whatever, but you can access the guidelines. And it's like it's a document. You'd have to read through it, but it's not too big of a document, and it kind of gives you a really good overview of each program. And you can even go to the completion report section, and it'll show you kind of what we're looking for, what MID is going to be expecting when you submit the completion report. So really, if you take the time to understand that, you could even be more prepared when it comes to paperwork time. And I should point out, I just have the guidelines up in front of me, that the live performance thing, it's 5 confirmed dates and 3 up to 3 that are in negotiation.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Just for anyone listening, just so there's no confusion there.
Yeah. And it's good that you mentioned that there are some things that we expect that when we need to see when it comes to either applying or doing the completion report. But once you said, once you've done it once, you get it. It's like, oh, okay, I got it, and it's we're happy to use a new platform this year. That it's the first year we're using something like this. It's basically a platform made for grants, and from what we've been getting as the feedback, people are really liking it. It's easy to use. It's user friendly, and we did some streamlining on our own, on the back end, to make sure that when you're going through the process, that it's as painless as possible. But we're there, yourself and Nicole, who manages the program, there to answer any questions by email. And something that's fairly new too is we're going to be starting to do some online info sessions. I don't know what the frequency is going to be, but we're going to be promoting these online sessions where anyone can register. It's for free. It's going to be a Zoom call for the beginning, but the idea is that you log in, either yourself or Nicole or both of you are there to talk about the new changes of the program, and it gives people an opportunity to ask questions. Just any question is a good question. So that's another thing that we're really looking forward to is letting people know that we're doing these online sessions, and that we're going to be readily available to answer any questions. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a mysterious process. Like any question, like you said, any question is a good question. If there's any confusion or you're wondering, is this correct or is that right or is this applicable? Like, we're always happy to help. I mean, sometimes we have to deliver unfortunate news or maybe give an answer that people don't want to hear, but there's always someone at Musique NB and MID out there to help. Absolutely. Yeah. And with the new increased funding, we'll be able to fund more projects, which is a really great thing. Yeah, I think that's worth pointing out that in the old program, or when it was the $20,000 up to $40,000, like, it's nice to hear those huge numbers if you're lucky enough to get awarded the money. But if you do the math, I mean, obviously, if you're giving one band $40,000, well, that's one band $40,000. But now, if it's 5, and now you can give 8 bands $5,000, it just kind of like, it gives more people the opportunity to access the funding, but it also, in terms of an investment point of view, it's a better way for the province to invest in their artists, because it gives you you have more people pursuing similar goals. Yeah, and it gives, one thing that was always tough for us, and we knew it, was that since we had limited amounts, we were trying to really stretch it out during the whole year. Even if, let's say, a component maximum was 5,000, and it was a good project, a lot of the time we'd say, well, we're going to give you 4 or 3.5 because we want to stretch it out. Well, now we will be able to give full amounts. Well, you know, if that's what you're asking and your application makes sense, and some of them are juried. There are actually 3 juried components: the artist development, marketing, and sound recording. But the others are done internally. It's not a jury. It's more, you know, well, you're one of the people who analyze these applications that come in. So it's a question of, is there anything missing? Is everything clear? Does it fit within the guidelines? Funding, is the funding available? And, you know, then that's the next, it's pretty clear cut. And the idea is to get the money out to projects that need them.
I know one question that I've, so actually before I started working with Musique NB, I applied myself to MID. And actually I just want to take this moment just to let everyone know that's listening in New Brunswick, like, you know, sometimes New Brunswick is a little, like some of us are a little apathetic to be in New Brunswick. But as I was traveling across the country playing in my band, when I would mention the MID program and explain, like, to me, I just assumed every province had something similar to MID, and that just isn't the case. Like, I was in British Columbia, and bands were like, what are you talking about? They gave you money to come on tour? Or like, I'd be in Thunder Bay, Ontario. My buddy would be like, whoa, we don't have anything like that. And if we did, we'd be competing with Toronto. So it's kind of a unique program that it just shouldn't get lost in that whole, like, you shouldn't assume it's in every province. It's kind of a special, unique thing to New Brunswick from my personal experience.
Well, Music Nova Scotia have a funding program. The 4 Atlantic provinces have one. The other provinces, some of them are like, there are different models. But we, I think now with this new increase, we're one of the, like, for the per capita population compared to the money that's going to be in the program, we're ahead of the game now, whereas before we were behind. So definitely, I think we could be proud of the program. I'm really hoping that, I really want to spend it all. That's my goal this year, is I want to get that money out into the pockets of artists and industry, so that we can not only justify to the province, you know, yes, we need it, but also look at these cool projects and look at these outcomes. Yeah. So, and that's going to, you know, as the year progresses, we're still fairly early in our fiscal year. It's touring season, festival season. So I think I'm really looking forward to this news getting out, because we just released this news, and hopefully it's circulating online, and we're going to make sure that people know about it, and that we're going to be, I'm sure we're going to start receiving a bunch of applications in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I actually got one last night. I'm pretty sure someone submitted one. Maybe we can touch briefly on, because probably people are listening and assuming we're only talking about musicians applying. But something like business travel, is that something like managers, or if you're a booking agent, or something, if you're in the industry but you're not necessarily a creative?
Exactly. It's super important. There are 2 components that businesses can apply to. So there's the business travel and professional development. So a venue, a festival, anyone who, let's say an agent, a manager, that is an example. There's some festivals that apply to go to ECMA. So this year it was in Charlottetown. Well, let's say you're coming from northern New Brunswick. Well, you know, it's going to cost you what it costs, you know, to take a drive to Charlottetown, spend 3-4 days in a hotel, blah, blah, blah. So we help cover some of those costs. If you're, let's say, a venue or a studio or even an agency, and you want to up your game in terms of marketing, you want to create some web assets or take some professional photography, anything that helps your business get ahead, you can apply to marketing. We've had in the past, mostly, I'd say most of the time, it's mostly artists applying to that, or artistic projects, or attached to an artistic project. But we have had venues and festivals apply to that, and that's where I was saying before, we'd like to expand our components to be able to include festivals or venues or even studios to kind of zone in more on what their needs are, and not just general marketing. And that's something we want to speak to the community about. We want to go and talk to studio owners, or talk to and see, okay, what would it be helpful? And not just paying for staff costs, because I mean, everyone always needs money to pay stuff like that, overhead. It would really be like around how to increase capacity in terms of creating. Well, that's the thing. That's part of what our questioning would be. Like, what would a new component look like to best serve that segment of the industry? But you're right. It's not just for artists.
Yeah, like I can think specifically, like I know some promoters who focus more on like all ages kind of punk rock, hard rock scenes. So they're maybe jumping around from venue to venue, you know, renting a Legion, renting this, but they need to have a reliable PA. So if they, you know, if they were able to invest in a PA that they could, instead of renting a PA each time too, there's that would be like, those kind of opportunities are like, they're happening all the time in the province too. And
yeah, and right now we don't cover any, what are they called? Capital investments where you're buying gear. So that's not part of what the MID program does, but maybe that's what a new component could be, you know, like provide us your project. What's your proposal? Why do you need this piece of equipment? You know, so those are the fun conversations that we'll have before the end, probably the end of this year or Christmas. Cool. But yeah.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to point out too is just thinking about the international, the ability to apply for international tours. When I started working with MID in this past January, I was actually kind of surprised how many artists were flying over to Europe and stuff. Like I just didn't think much about it, and it was really cool to learn that there was a decent amount of a handful of artists who were pursuing that on the regular, or so it seems to me in my limited experience. So, and I know there's all kinds of musicians and artists out there who dream of that, of touring Europe or touring, Australia or anything. So I think that would be anyone listening who's thinking about that. MID might be your best friend if you want to give it a shot.
Well, that's the thing. Some artists are put in a position where they are offered something and they have to decline because it's just like, how am I going to get there? How am I going to pay for this? And when you go to Europe, and we've seen it in the news not long ago where you had some artists who were waiting on their P2 visas to go to the States and they didn't come in, so they had to cancel the tour. The hypochondriacs just posted online that they canceled the tour. So, we'll try to help them anyway. They paid good money for those P2 visas that never came in, but it's really unfortunate. But when it comes to international touring, you're right. There are a good amount of artists that are going over, sometimes for showcases, sometimes for 4 or 5 shows. Getting there, especially if you're in a band, is so. And I've had that experience myself, going over with 5 musicians for one showcase, a 20-minute showcase. It was $10,000 easily, just for flights and hotels for a couple of days and per diems and artist fees. Because we're as artists, we're going. We encourage everyone applying to the MID program. Like sometimes people apply and they're not putting artist fees. So we said that we tell them, it's like, well, we're going to add artist fees because you're eligible to them. Yeah, and it's paid out 100%. Yeah, but that's part of when you're an export artist. If you don't have access to funding, especially when you're starting to develop a market before you can start getting guarantees from different festivals or venues when you are touring, a lot of the time those guarantees aren't enough to justify going over. So and this is a very Canadian thing. We get used to, you talk to folks in other countries and they're like, Canada's known worldwide to support their artists in this way. And unless you go live in another country and you realize, oh yeah, they don't, it's a very special thing. And each province has access. Well, most provinces have access to funding, but also federally with FACT or Musicaction. So we're very lucky in that regard that our artists have the ability to say yes to these kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, and being able to get some help for that investment to go play that showcase overseas. I mean, if the right buyer sees you, then that can turn into a tour, next year or 6 months later. You might be booking a full-on tour, not just a showcase.
Well, a lot of the time, artists going over, yes, they're playing for talent buyers and stuff like venues and festivals, but sometimes they're looking for an agent, a booking agent on that territory. Because if you're wanting to develop a certain market, it's very, very difficult to do it from here. So that's when, if you can find someone who can be booking, like you look at some artists that are A-list export artists, you go on their websites, you'll see, European agent, US agent, Canadian agent. And that's because those different agents know and understand their own markets. So if you're in Canada, it's really difficult to book a tour in Germany. Or if you're a German booking agent, you know, are you going to book the Southern United States? It doesn't make sense. So a lot of the time, artists going over to showcasing events are often looking for team members in that market.
Cool. Yeah, we're almost out of time here, Jean, but I just want to bring up one other thing too, is like, we mentioned earlier that there may not be as many, like, there's no program per se directed towards like studios and like capital investments and that stuff. But as a studio owner, like, you are allowed to fill out the application for an artist. So, or like as a manager might be filling out the application for their artist. So like, if you could imagine if you're a studio owner out there who's just running a small studio, like if you're attracting bands and the band doesn't understand that MID exists, you as the engineer or the marketer or the booking agent, you could explain to your new artist that, hey, there's some funding here available. And if you understand the process as the industry professional, you can help them apply basically. And then it's kind of like a win-win scenario.
Well, yeah, it's true. And we've seen that happen, well, especially for managers and agents that work for artists. They'll do the application work. It's still under the artist's name, so the money goes to the artist. But you know, the work there's an admin fee. Usually, the artist will pay a certain amount to the manager for doing the work, because it is work and it's paid work. But studios can also do that. You're right. The studio can, if they're familiar with the investment program, they can sit down with the artist and say, "Hey, look at this. You know, this component of the MID program. This is how it works." Sometimes it's just getting the artist to be aware that exists, and then they can send in an application. Yeah, exactly. Knowing that they'll be working with them. And you're right that some studios will take it upon, or labels will take it upon themselves to do some of that work for the artist as well. Yeah. And it's important that you mentioned that the money does go to the artist, because that is, you know, I could imagine people thinking, oh yeah, the manager's applying and the money's going into the manager's pocket. How do we know it's going to the artist? But that's something we verify when a completion report comes in. And I also want to just quickly mention too, like the studio owner, they may have already talked to and came up with a budget of $2 or $3 grand to record. Well, then they might be able to almost double that using MID if they can help an artist, like be like, well, we might be able to double your budget if we apply to MID, which would allow you to do these other things on your project. Yeah, bring in, like, you know, your solo project all of a sudden has a backup band. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, you can send it to get mixed at a different studio, or properly mastered, or hey, I've always wanted to have a string quartet play on a tune. You know, there's a lot of different things that can happen if you've got more capacity when you in your budget, for sure. And you're right to say that the money. You know, we ask very clear questions in the application. We want to make sure that the person receiving the money is the right person, but also the responsible person, that they know what they're getting into, because they do sign a contract at the end, or an agreement at the end of it, that we're giving you this money. We expect, these are the things we expect. And these are the things you can expect from us. And so I think it's just it's a pretty good deal. Yeah. Yeah. Both sides are held accountable, and that's the way it should be. Yeah. Very cool. So I think that was a really awesome info session, as well as like a little mini history lesson on NB Sound Initiative / Musique NB / MID. Yeah, no, it's an ongoing thing. I mean, it started in the early 2000s, so like we're 2024, so it's a program that has a history, and it'd be really actually interesting to go through all that history and make a list of all the albums or all the initiatives that happened. Probably because of the program too. I think we'd be very impressed on the number of projects that were not only just projects that were supported, but also successful projects that were supported. Yeah, I mean, I would challenge any listener too, to, if you have some old CDs, like we mentioned before the interview started that at my other job at a radio station, I've been backing up local music. So I've been like picking up Dionysus records, an old Fredericton band. There's that NB Sound Initiative logo on it, or I'm looking at like 283, I guess, would be another band. Like if you go back through, you'll see all these little logos, and you'll see it today too. Like if you take a peek, you'll probably see the Musique NB logo, the government logo, showing that the investment was there. So that's pretty cool. It is cool.
it might be worth too pointing out that Musique NB, you can go to musicnb.org and just, you can sign up to be a Musique NB member. And that has all kinds of perks. You don't have to be a member to apply to the MID program, which may confuse a couple. I'm sure some people think that because they haven't paid the dues and aren't a Musique NB member officially, that doesn't affect your MID credit ability to apply to the MID program.
Not at all. No, it's not. They're not attached. They're really two different things, and we try to keep both very distinct and are at arm's length. I find that's important. But you're right that you can be. It's fairly easy to become a member. We try to keep it really cost effective. There's a lot of perks, like you say, stuff in the back end, information, and even for the MID program, go to the website, poke around, create a user. Create an account and see what the applications look like. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything to do that, so it's worth. And the next deadline, as such, the artist development marketing is September 1st. So a little bit of time, but the other programs are rolling deadlines, so you can apply to those anytime.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jean. I really appreciate it. Of course, if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out or drop us, either of us, a line, really, the Musique NB or MID website.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the time today, Jay. It was a great chat.
Yeah, it was really great. And it's awesome we've got the extra funding to pump out there. So we'll be hearing a bunch of awesome recordings and getting a bunch of completion reports later in the year that I'll be excited to read through and learn about. So
visions of ROI.
ROI, yeah. Love the ROI. The government likes a good ROI, so.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. All right, cool. Thanks a lot, John. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome. See ya.
See ya.